All right, we are going to look at Math and Society's Numbers in the Real World F2, finding relative change. In this unit, we're talking about CPI. One of the things we need is a more detailed CPI chart. This is just a standard CPI chart like we talked about in class. This has all of the years from 1913 to 2024. So right now, I would highly recommend taking a screenshot of this so that you have it easy to access. All right, we're going to look at the first example. So we want to be able to calculate costs over time and make quantitative comparisons. What the heck does that mean? Well, in equation terms, we want to find the relative change and then compute the growth factor. So let's look at example 1. Find the inflation rate from 2021 to 2023. How does it compare to the inflation rate of the late 70s? Specifically use 1977 and 79 for the CPI information. Breaking it down, what am I looking at? I want to know the inflation rate from 2021 to 23. This is a relative calculation. I also want the inflation rate from 1977 to 1979. This is a relative calculation. Now, we've done these before. Our relative calculation for the inflation rate is just CPI end minus CPI start over CPI start. When we change which years we use, we're using CPI end minus CPI start over CPI start. Using this information, pause the video as soon as I put this CPI calculation table up again and see if you can create your forms. Now that we have that, let's look at what our math is actually going to be here. So if I'm going to calculate the CPI to find the relative change, we're going to end up with percents. Now, hopefully, we've got some calculations here for our percents. I got this calculation for the first CPI. Going through and doing the math, I got 12.4%. For the second calculation, my relative calculation turned out like this, and I got 19.8%. So what have we done right now? We found the relative change in CPI. This gave us 2% numbers. We can see those. Well, now I want to figure out a growth factor. I need these two numbers for my growth factor. How I will calculate that is we will take our relative end in inflation divided by the relative start in inflation. This was later than this one, so this was my end. This was my start. I need to know how many times this inflation was compared to this inflation. So I get a simple number, a proportion, turns into a decimal. Now this is not a percent, this is a growth factor, so we're going to leave the number like this. The inflation for cost in 2021 to 23 is 0.62 times as much as the inflation cost from 77 to 79. That's all that says. This is what we multiplied by. We're going to do this again with a new problem, and we're going to actually write the sentence. So give me a moment to reset. Pause the video if you need to. All right, we're going to look at students who took out loans. The average college debt for seniors in public institutions rose from $22,140 in 2008 to $25,921 in 2023. We want to write a quantitative sentence comparing the rate of increase in public schools and debt, or school debt, from 2008 to 2023 with the overall inflation rate for the same work. So what are we doing? Well, first, once again, we're going to find the relative change in the CPI. Then we're going to find the growth factor for inflation. This and this will get us our answer. So to begin with, what is our CPI problem going to look like? Well, we need a relative change in school cost, and I need my relative change in inflation rate. Take a moment to set up what you think that's going to look like. This was my template for what I needed. And based on those templates, I got the following values. Little calculator magic. I got the following percents. So then what do I do from here? We have completed this step. Find the relative change in CPIs. Now we need to find the growth factor. So how am I going to find the growth factor? Well, I need the end inflation divided by the start inflation. So this was my oldest, so that's my start. This is my newest, so that's my end. How would I compare these two numbers together? Well, our comparative growth factor is debt to inflation. That's how the story problem asked us. What is the debt to inflation? Debt to inflation turned into a fraction, turned into a calculation, turned into a growth factor. Our debt is 0.41 times as much as our inflation. That sounds like a great sentence structure. We have this nice little spot here for our sentence structure. Write a quantitative sentence comparing the rate of increase in public school debt to the inflation for the overall same time period. Cool. So I can say that the debt of public school colleges students grew 0.41 times the rate of inflation. So they didn't grow at the same rate. That would be a 1. It grew at a scale factor of it. Now this one specifically says public schools, which means there's a consideration that we could have had private schools. Fortunately, we have that for number 3. Take time to try to answer this question yourself. For private institutions, the increase was from 34,800 to 54,921. Write a quantitative sentence comparing the rate of increase in private school debt from 2008 to 2023 with the overall inflation rate for the same time period. Round your growth to the nearest 1/10 of a percent. Once again, you're going to find your relative CPIs and then compare them using growth factor proportion, not proportion, ratio. All right. Do you have your setup for the tuition? We are going to need tuition costs, and we're going to need inflation rate. This looks really familiar. That is the same inflation rate that we used in number 2. Tuition costs is going to be a little different. And once we get to here, we can look at our growth factor. So our growth factor, using the same inflation rate as before for our relative calculation, I get 57.8 over 41.5, which is 1.39 times as much. It's over 100%. Oh, costs a whole lot more. So how would we structure this? Well, using the same sentence structure as our question asks, the debt of private college students grew at 1.39 times the rate of CPI. Okay, well, this makes me go, how does that compare to private school and public school? The numbers are very, very different. We could actually say, what is the growth rate of private to public? Well, since this was a scale growth factor and this is a growth factor, we can do that. 0.41 over 1.39. And if I wanted to look at public to private, we can make our comparison statements that we had done before. Take a moment to see what you get. Holy cow. Public school grew at a third the rate of private school. Private school grew 300% or 3 times the rate of public. Crazy. All right, finish your notes. Homework next.